Now, I mention that because whenever I read passages like this, and you might be the same way, I read it and I think, okay, that's good, but I don't consciously think this, but in a way I'm thinking, but this is kind of like optional. You know, like you go to your fast food and they said, "Oh, do you want fries with that?" Right? It's kind of like an option, right? It's just optional. You go to your meal and you finish your dinner and then you're like, "Oh, would you want to have dessert?" It's like a little add-on, right? This is not essential. This is not an essential part of the Christian life, right? It's optional. Like it's good to have, right? Fries are good to have. Dessert is really great to have. I like to have that. It's a great option to have, but it's just optional. It's not the main meal. It's not the foundation of my belief. Other things are the foundation, right? It's my faith, it's my trust, it's my belief in who Jesus is and about the gospel, and that's all true. Those are all foundational things. But when we read a passage like this, I don't think we take it very seriously. Versus other commands in the Bible, you know, do not have an idol, do not get drunk, do not do this, or love your neighbor. Those are the ones. You better take it seriously. Go and share the gospel and make disciples of all nations. Oh, I better take that one seriously. That one seems very important to me. This one? Not so much. We don't take this seriously enough. When Paul says we are to rejoice always, and he'll say it again to rejoice, we need to take this more seriously. Let's look at another passage in 1 Thessalonians 5. This kind of really emphasizes, when I look at this passage, it really elevates what Paul is saying in Philippians 4:4. Verse 16 in 1 Thessalonians 5 says, rejoice always, again, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Do you know the Bible doesn't say God's will very often? Those words, God's will, is not written in the Bible very often. There's actually very few times that you'll see the Bible say, this is God's will, that plainly, right? This is one of them. This is one of them where it says, this is God's will. Okay, as Christians, that's something that we are conscious about. That's something that we should be thinking about, like what is God's will for us? Okay, he makes it very plain. He says, rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will. Very plain. It's not a mystery, right? We think that God's will is kind of mysterious and elusive. Okay, and what we really mean by that is, what is God's specific will for me? Right? When we say God's will is mysterious, I think what we're really saying is, what is God's individual will for me? Specific will for me, like who am I going to marry? Or what job am I going to have? Or where should I live? Like when we ask those specific questions, I think that's what's in our mind when we think like God's will is kind of elusive, right? But when we think about God's will in general for all of us, for all believers, it's very clear. This is one of the passages that make it very clear what his will for us. Rejoice always. Pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances. This is God's will for you. This is our job description, right? If you go to your job, you have like a job description of what you're supposed to do in your job. This is our job description. He says, this is my will for you. Rejoice always. Pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances. Now, when we look at this, it really emphasizes or really elevates what Paul is talking about in Philippians 4:4 when he says, you need to rejoice in the Lord always, because this is God's will for you, right? And like I said, when we think about God's will, we think about our specific situation in our life. You know, we're going through a difficult time. We're going through a transition. We're going through a fork in the road and saying like, what is God's will for me? And then we're praying and asking, right? And sometimes that asking is hard. We feel frustrated. We don't feel like we're hearing anything from God. We don't feel like we're getting any direction. You know, it'd be easier if we could just like flip a coin and just say, okay, if it heads, I'm going to choose this job. Or if it's tails, I'm going to go choose this other area, right? Sometimes it feels like it'd be easier at that. But as Christians, we like try to seek God's will. Like, what is your will for me in this area? What do you want from me? And that's a good thing. I'm not saying that that's wrong, that we shouldn't be doing that. But what I want to share with you is this. A lot of times when God's specific will is unclear, what should we do? Should we continue to be frustrated and ask? Or should we focus on his part of his will that is clear to us? And I think that this is the part that we want to focus in on today. This is clear. You don't have to ask. You don't have to wonder. You don't have to wonder, is this God's will for me? Does he want this for me in my life? No, it's very clear, 100%. Yes, rejoice always. Yes, that's his will for you. That's his desire. That's his heart for you. That's his purpose for you and why he put you in Christ, to rejoice always. And I think that if we spend more time focusing in on the things that are clear, the things that aren't clear will become clear. Does that make sense? Like we constantly seeking the things that are not known yet, the things that aren't revealed yet, and we keep making that our primary focus when I think that that's backwards. We should make our primary focus the things that are clear, the things that God is saying to us and is speaking to us, like 1 Thessalonians 5:16 through 18. That's clear. So if we're looking and asking God for direction in these different areas and we're not finding it, guess what? Don't worry about that. Go to what is clear. Focus your attention on that. Make this your primary focus where you're pouring all your energy. And let me tell you, when I've done this, the other things become more clear. God starts speaking. And a lot of times we can't hear from God because we're not doing this. We're not in a place where we can hear from him. We're not in a place because we're so anxious or we're so worried or we're trying to control too much in our own life. We can't even hear from God. So what puts us in a position where we can hear his specific will for us is if we're rejoicing always. If we're constantly talking to him and communicating, not because we're asking him for something, because we want to be connected with him, that we want to be intimate with him, that we want to communicate with him, that we're giving thanks in all circumstances, that we're grateful, we have a grateful attitude. Can I tell you, if you do those three things, God will speak to you more clearly. It's not because God doesn't want to speak to you. God does want to speak to you. The problem is here on our side. It's not from his side. The problem is we can't hear because our heart condition is not in the right place to be able to understand, to hear, to be able to receive what he's saying.